So welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here today. We are extremely sorry for the glitch we were facing. So today I am going to present on challenges in REST API testing. So let's get started. My name is Dheeraj Agarwal and I am working here in Optimizory Technologies as an engineering manager. I oversee various products including VREST here, which mainly focuses on REST API testing. So okay. In today's session, we are going to start with the introduction to REST API, and then we will discuss the importance of automated API testing. Then we will discuss the common challenges in REST API testing we face while automating the testing of our web applications. We will also talk about the strategies to handle these challenges. These challenges, solutions, and requirements will definitely help you to find out the best tool or framework in your automation testing needs. So if you have already worked upon any API testing tools or frameworks in the past, then in your automation testing journey so far, you might have faced various challenges or issues. So while working on different tools or framework, every framework has different set of challenges or issues. So please do share your experiences in the chat section. Don't wait until the end of the session here. This will really help all of us to find out the most prominent issues in REST API testing. Finally, at the end, we will be having a question and answer session. So please drop your questions right in the chat section. We will try to address them at the end of this webinar. So together we will learn something new by the end of this webinar. Before we get started, I would like to know you better. So could you please introduce yourself in the chat? Let us know your name, your profile, and the API testing frameworks or tools you have worked with so far. Okay. Okay. So Pritam has used Postman. Anybody else would like to share? Okay. Ankur SDET with experience in REST assured and XCUI test in Cypress. Okay. Ankit is having experience in React and Node. Maybe Ankit is working on and some scripted test automation frameworks. Okay, JMeter or something. Okay. Okay. So let's start with the introduction to REST API. So REST is an architectural style having a set of constraints to develop network applications, especially web services. Any API that adheres to these constraints is known as RESTful API. If we think of REST API, two things comes into our picture. One is client who is requesting the resources, and one is server who is serving them. So here in this diagram, where your website application or whether it's your website application or your mobile application, it is acting like a client which is requesting the resources from web server. The web server basically understands the request and process it, and it fetches all the information available in the database and fulfill the client's request. So this is how REST API works behind the scene over the network. REST means representational state transfer. So if we do the breakdown of REST, so here representation means information is exchanged through standardized format, for example, JSON or XML. So is known as representation of the resource, and state here represents the stateless interaction. So each request from client to server has all the information necessary for the server to understand it and process it. The server doesn't need to store anything on doesn't need to store any state between requests about the client session. So whatever information it needs to process the request, the client will send that particular information in the form of request parameters or headers. So the third term is transfer. So the data is transferred between client and server uh, over the network using standard protocols like HTTP. So we don't need to rely on any custom protocols. REST works on some standard protocol like HTTP. So now let's talk about why we need automated API testing. There are several benefits of API testing. For example, it improves the build quality of our web application. There are numerous services which we use in day-to-day life in mobile or laptop. Those services are working through REST APIs. So I think everybody uses mobile or laptop, and they access various services on the laptop or mobile. Uh, so ensuring the correctness and stability of those APIs is very crucial. Otherwise, those mobile apps will not work. So if we talk about the test pyramid as advocated by the Mike Cohen, uh, it emphasizes the balanced approach to testing. With we write majority of test cases as unit at the unit level. So if we go upper in the hierarchy, then our the volume of test cases will reduce. So we have smaller number of integration test cases and even smaller number of test cases we will write for end-to-end test cases. So automated API testing fits within this pyramid in occupying the middle layer of integration test cases. So by automating API test cases, we achieve comprehensive coverage of application functionality in less cost. So as API covers the core of the application functionality, that is business logic. That's why it provides the comprehensive test coverage. Now let's talk about the common challenges that we all face while automating the REST API testing. So the first challenge, so when we start automated REST API testing, the first step is to set up everything you need to make sure your testing goes smoothly. So the first step will be to choose a framework and establish the dependencies uh, and adding versioning to it. So these are the first steps. So dependency management is very crucial. So getting your environment ready can be challenging. For instance, when you are adding something like REST Assure to your project, you will need to make sure everything else it needs is set up correctly too. So this means managing dependencies using tools like Maven or Gradle and ensuring they all work well together. So what's the challenge? So these dependencies may become outdated over time and can conflict with other common dependencies. So it is possible that whatever dependencies the rest assured needs, they conflict with other common dependencies with the project. So this creates problems. This is not a hurdle for if you are a developer, but if your testing team doesn't have if your testing team have limited limited coding knowledge, then this can create issues. So fixing those conflicts would be harder for the testing team. So if you are using a code-based framework, then this problem it can become an headache. But in codeless tool, it's very easy. So the best way to deal with this problem is to keep your dependencies updated regularly. If you don't, it will only get trickier to fix later on. So this dependency management could be quite easier for the developers. Uh, it would be very difficult to solve if your testing team has limited coding knowledge. Since APIs are independent of underlying implementation language or platform, it's possible to develop APIs in one language or platform technological stack or implement test cases in another language. Or maybe via some specialized testing tools. This decoupling of development and testing allows team to leverage the strengths of different languages or tools for API development and testing. So it's very important to assess your team's capabilities and invest in the appropriate tool or framework. So you need to decide whether you want to use code-based tools or you want to use codeless, scriptless tools. So the next uh, challenge is related to the configuration management, ensuring that what does it mean? It means that your test cases are stayed in sync with your project code. It's really important if you are using a framework where you write code for your API test cases. So in your project code, you can maintain the for example, if we talk about this Java example, so you are maintaining your project code inside the main directory, and you are maintaining the test data test cases inside the test directory. So if you are using any scripted framework, then it is very easy over here, because you can your test cases will remain in sync with your project code. You can use a single repository to maintain your project data as well as your test cases. So your test cases will always remain in sync with your project code. But but you need to be extra careful for if you are using codeless or scriptless tools. You need to ensure that the scriptless tool provides versioning capability. So in scriptless tool, you might face challenges. For example, if the tool doesn't support versioning at all, or might not even let you export your test cases easily. Even if the tool supports exporting, it might export all of your test cases in one huge file, which can be headache to manage. For example, if we talk about the Postman, it exports all the collection data inside one huge file. So it would be difficult to manage inside version control system. It would be difficult to review if you would like to review them over a period of time. So some tools might have limited version control features. Git, for example, has lots of features, has very vast. So, but a tool might not support all of them. This could be fine for most of the cases, but if your organization has specific Git workflows, it could cause problems. So if you're selecting the scriptless tool for your API automation testing, then I recommend you to just write down all of your requirements related to the versioning and verify whether the selected tool supports all of them. Okay. So next is basically the framework structure. Making sure your API test cases are well organized is really, really important. If you break down your API scripts into smaller and usable parts, it's easier to fix problems and keep everything working smoothly. But if you have lots of duplicated test logic, it could lead to maintenance issues. And by encouraging the use of reusable logic, regardless of the testing approach, teams can streamline their testing efforts, improve maintainability, and reduce the risk of errors over time. So we recommend you to organize your test scripts to enhance reusability and minimize maintenance challenges. So after initial setup, the next phase is to develop the API test cases. Now let's see what challenges you may face while developing the API test cases. So the first challenge over here is related to testing all request parameter combination. So testing the API with different combination of parameters to ensure that it behaves as expected under different scenarios. It could be challenging to write test cases for each scenario. First challenge is to identify API endpoints and its request parameters. Uh, what it accepts the request parameter, it could be challenging. So these parameters could include query parameters, headers, body parameters, or path parameters. If we have not written the API specification, then it would be very harder to identify these parameters. So the solution would be to write an API spec. It will bring more clarity to API automation process and resolve lots of other issues as well. So writing an API specification in the beginning is very, very important. It will really help you. So type yes if you are also using API specification in your API testing process. Otherwise, you can type no. Okay, Akash Misra is saying yes. Shubham Gautam is also saying yes. Okay, open API specs are used. Okay. So based on the parameters identified, you may consider. Once you have API specification written, you can identify those parameters easily. So based on the parameters identified, you may consider various factors like valid, invalid scenarios, boundary test cases, edge cases, and optional parameters, required parameters, testing various user roles. Such kind of scenarios could be covered covered, but the challenge is this this results in a lots of duplicated test logic. So data-driven testing can make this process easier. In this testing approach, you may maintain a separate data source, say an Excel sheet for all the combination of request parameters of an API, and you may also maintain the expected response against each scenario. This could be a challenge to keep this test data in sync with API specifications. For each test case request that you execute from the framework or tool, if you may validate the request response structure against the API specification, then it will help you to keep your test data in sync with your API specification. So first, you need to write data-driven test cases. So here you can write a readable test logic, and test data could be uh, can be feed through any data source, say Excel sheet, and you can execute those test cases easily by providing the reusable logic. So similarly, you can apply the same process for other APIs as well, and you can combine this approach with your API specifications, and you can validate the request and response structure also of your API, so that your test data will remain in sync with your API test cases. So the next challenge is related to the sequencing of API calls. So what does it mean? Sequencing of API calls refers to the order in which API requests are made and the dependencies between these requests. This aspect of API testing is crucial, especially in scenarios where multiple API calls need to be executed in a specific sequence to achieve the desired functionality. So this could be a challenge to find out the exact sequence to make API calls. For chaining multiple API requests, we may need to extract the information from one API and pass on that information to subsequent API requests. So the first issue is related to the finding the correct sequence of API calls that we need to cover. The second challenge could be related to passing data from one API call to another. So recording the actual web application uh, can do this magic of recording the whole scenario. It could be helpful to avoid the human mistakes in configuring the API flow. Later on, you may tweak the recorded test cases and link them by passing information from one API to another. So this would be very helpful if you record your API test cases, and you will be able to configure your API flow very quickly. Next challenge could be related to the test case debugging. So test failures may occur while developing API test cases or in the production as well. Test case debugging can present challenges, particularly in complex systems or when dealing with large volumes of test cases. It could be a challenge to verify a uh, deeply nested API response. It would be very difficult to debug if you don't store enough information to reproduce the failure. Storing the full API request and response details against each test case will really help you out to understand the failure. So this is whenever you are uh, uh, whenever you are analyzing any testing tool or framework, you should check whether you have all the request and response details uh, against each executed test case. So this should be a check whenever you are working, whenever you are analyzing any testing tool. So, and these adjustment report and diff report will help you out to quickly find out the API failure. For example, if we talk about this diff report in the right side, this diff report, by looking at a first glance, I will be able to find out what is the problem in this API. So I can easily fix this API test case by looking just the diff report of this uh, test case. So the next is mocking services. Mocking services is a common practice in API testing where simulated versions of the APIs are used to isolate the system under test and facilitate controlled testing scenarios. So, however, there are several challenges associated, like keeping the mock APIs in sync with API spec, generating dynamic mock APIs. So mock services often need to generate dynamic data responses to simulate realistic scenarios. Generating dynamic data that accurately reflects the variability and complexity of real-world data can be challenging. So if the application is already developed, then what you can do, you can simply record your mock APIs via the actual requests. Uh, if your application is already developed, then you can do this. You can apply this approach, and there is one more problem. Your mock APIs may go out of sync with the API specs. So for that, what you can do, for each executed mock API, you can validate whether the mock API is. You can verify the request which is going to the API mock, and you can verify the response structure which is coming from the mock API against the API specification. By this way, you can validate the structure of your. You can remain in sync with your API spec. So your API specification will become the source of truth in this case. To generate dynamic mock API, what you can do, you can use on-demand testable services uh, that will help you to set up the mock APIs on when you invoke the setup method of your test case, and you can you can clear your configured mock services in the tear down method. So you can use on-demand testable services. One example is Mountbank. The next hurdle is synchronizing API test cases against API specifications. So it's really important to make sure your API test cases are in sync with the specification of our APIs. So it's similar to the mock APIs we just talked about. So your API test cases also may go out of sync with your API specification. This is the challenge, and APIs are evolving. Test maintenance effort becomes very high. Okay. So how to fix this? First, uh, let's talk about identifying out of sync API test cases. For that, what you can do, you can simply validate the request and response structure of your API test cases of your executed API test case request against the API specification. So if the test case goes out of sync with the API spec, then it can mark whether the test case is going out of sync, for example. And the second option would be to generate dynamic test data as per the API spec. For example, if you are generating the boundary value test cases for your API test case, and then you can use this. For example, I have given an example of max length 15. So in your API test cases, you can generate boundary value test cases based on this property. Now, if you change this property in the API spec, then your test cases will automatically reflect the latest test data. You don't need to update your test data over and over again for these uh, inputs. If you change these inputs in the API spec, so you can Your API test cases will reflect the latest test data as per the API specification. Further challenge would be related to the integration with third-party tools. Uh, uh, you can automate defect logging on API failure. It could be a challenge and notify team members via communication channel like Slack, HipChat, there is also a need to update status in test case management tools. For example, if you are using the Fire or Test Cell, so there is also a need for integrating your uh, framework or tool with these ecosystem tools. So before starting the API test automation, you need to make sure that your framework or tool supports seamless integration with these ecosystem tools. These integration will definitely reduce the time to defect resolution and bring clarity among team members. This also plays an important role for a successful API test automation. Okay, that's all for today's session. As we come to the end of the webinar, I hope you have learned valuable insights into the requirements and challenges associated with API testing frameworks and tools. If you have any questions, please do let me know in the chat section. If you have any experiences, if you are facing any challenge in API testing, then just share your challenge or issue here in the chat section. We will try to address them. Okay. So, what is the challenge that you are facing, Ankur? Although we have separated all our test specs based on our microservices. Maybe you can email us or you can write down your challenge because I'm not able to understand the actual challenge that I understand that you are having a challenge of maintaining a large number of test cases, but what is the actual problem that you are facing? Ankur, maybe you can write down your problem in the uh, at support at the rate videos.io. We will try to reply over there. Okay, we need to understand more about this. So, what debugging capabilities are there which you are using to Do you have all the information related to request and response, such kind of things we need to understand? Okay. Any AI tool in this domain? I think nowadays various companies are using AI. So there are various tools like Test Sigma, uh, Functionize. So which I'm not sure. We are also planning to have AI in VREST also. So then you will be able to use VREST AI in VREST also. If we don't have any further questions, then let's close this session. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. I hope you found it informative and insightful. If you have any further questions or would like to continue the discussion, feel free to reach out to us at support@vs.io. Wishing you all the best in your API testing journey. Thank you.